I always feel a little awkward at that little section there about the offering. When I was at Good Shepherd for 20 years, they always told me, keep your hands out of we'll do that part, you do the rest of it. So I didn't ever have to worry about the financial aspect of it, so I seldom commented on that. That was our church council and people that were willing to take that on. I had a gift given to me that they said, you don't worry about the finances, you do the pastor stuff, that's our job. So I'm always a little uncomfortable talking about that. However, Bob Langseth was really good at it. So I'm going to put in a stone again of concern obviously for what's going on in Palestine, Israel, and as we delve into this today, I was really kind of in a real down spot this last couple weeks, and last week when I looked at that story of the Good Samaritan, knowing what was going on in Gaza at the moment and in other places, it weighed heavily on my soul, I guess. And so when I tell this, when we do again today, look at another parable, I want to make sure that I'm saying that we need to look at things from a variety of perspectives, not just one. And that's a very controversial thing to do these days, is to make a statement, to come out and say we need to be peacemakers. I don't understand why peacemaking is controversial, but it is, because the pressure is to take sides. And there are sides to be taken, but there's more than one side to be taken. So back again at a parable, and we'll go ahead and start with the first thing to put on our screen. A parable. This is a little bit different definition than we used last week, but a parable is a codification, or a code is a shortened version of that, or a picture of the world and how it works at a given time. What does this ancient and possibly unfamiliar story of the laborers in the vineyard from Matthew say about the world at the time? How might it help us this morning understand the current crisis in Palestine? And when I made an edit that didn't make it into this Palestine/Israel, how might this story help us understand the current crisis in Palestine, Israel, and also our own world? And can it make us aware, when we understand the story in a little bit different way, of what is sacred and holy, regardless of how we define God? So, to begin with, I would like to have another overhead, and this is the view that I would like for us to be able to take today. And there are different ways to understand it, the story, but consider beginning with the category of religion and understand how in a different world and in our own, religion was the filter through which people saw things at that time, the time the story was told. So you go from religion, through religion you understand kinship, group values, you understand an economy, and keeping in mind that we have tended to separate those two things specifically, and politics. So the filter or the lens through which people see the world is through religion, and it can go around or it can go through religion and up to kinship, economy, and politics. So I want you to try to have that in your mind as I now read the story, or you can read the story along with me that will be on the screen. The parable is from Matthew 20, but the divisions in what we know as the New Testament were not there when it was written. Someone came along at some point and put chapters and verses in there. Okay, so right before the story of the laborers in the vineyard is this verse, 19:30. And it's a lens. But many that are first will be last, and the last first. Then the story begins. For the kingdom of heaven is like a householder who went out early in the morning to hire laborers for his vineyard. After agreeing with the laborers for a denarius a day, he sent them into the vineyard. And going out about the third hour, about 9 a.m., that's my parentheses in there, he saw others standing idle in the marketplace and said, and to them he said, "You go into the vineyard too, and whatever is right I will give you." So they went. Going out again about the 6th hour and the 9th hour, or noon and 3 p.m., he did the same. And about the 11th hour he went out and found others standing. And he said to them, "Why do you stand here idle all day?" They said to him, "Because no one has hired us." He said to them, "You go into the vineyard too." And when evening came, the owner of the vineyard said to his steward, "Call the laborers and pay them their wages, beginning with the last up to the first." And when those hired about the 11th hour came, each of them received a denarius. Now when the first came, they thought they would receive more, but each of them also received a denarius. And on receiving it, they grumbled at the householder, saying, "These last worked only 1 hour, and you have made them equal to us, who have borne the burden of the day and the scorching heat." But he replied to one of them, "Friend, I am doing you no wrong. Did you not agree with me for a denarius? Take what belongs to you and go. I choose to give to this last as I give to you. Am I not allowed to do what I choose with what belongs to me? Or do you begrudge my generosity?" Or in another translation it says, is your eye evil because I am good? So the last will be first, and the first last. What in heck does all that mean? Well, a better way to say that is, what are the possible meanings that we could glean? So please note, as I did before in verse 19:30, the theme of the first will be last and the last will be first, because that connects with, in the story itself, verse 20, or chapter 20, verse 8, "Call the laborers and pay them their wages, beginning with the last up to the first." And verse 14 says, "I choose to give to this last as I give to you." And verse 16, "So the last will be first and the first last." It seems like Matthew's trying to make a point here, or Jesus if he told this story. So that could be a theme that we could explore. Another one would be the kingdom of heaven is like, which is how the parable starts. The kingdom of heaven is like this. And I'm thinking, oh, okay. How is that like the kingdom? The first and the last. Well, okay. Anyway. Another way to look at it, well, it's about the generosity of the vineyard owner who chooses to give to someone who only worked an hour or a few hours, what appears to be in the story a decent wage. We'll see about that. So it could be about the generosity of the vineyard owner, or it could be about, we don't understand the wisdom of God because we assume this parable is about God somehow. When the landowner says, "Am I not allowed to do what I choose with what belongs to me?" Well, we could say, well, I guess we just don't understand God's ways. Or it could be about, well, everyone is accepted. In the end, everybody's accepted. So it's not real clear. There's a story here, or there's a lot of stories here. There's a lot of meanings. Depends upon how you look at the picture, how you understand it. But you could also say it's just not clear. So if we want to try to make it clearer, then the audience and the context need to be looked at to understand a meaning of this parable. So Matthew, where this parable is found, writes a little bit earlier than this, 7 verses earlier. Here's the audience. Jesus said to his disciples, "Truly I tell you, it will be hard for a rich person to enter the kingdom of heaven." Oh, so scholars would say, so Jesus is talking to the disciples about wealth, about money. It appears, at least in Matthew, that the disciples are the audience. So then if you look back through time, some scholars have said this is a parable, it's an allegory. Obviously, it's an allegory. The householder or the landowner must be God. And the laborers then are seen in a negative light because they're grumbling. But what does God do in response? God's graceful. Or it could be about, well, so the grace of God is perhaps a theme, and the sin of humankind in grumbling, that could be another theme. Or the theme could be the harvest is coming. Get ready for it. You know, the world is going to end, however you want to understand that. So it then fits into teachings about money. It fits into teachings about heaven and hell, about the wisdom of God, about the reversal of our expectations. The last will be first. All these are possibilities. And they all have a basis in Matthew's world and how Matthew frames the story. That's not very satisfactory to somebody like me. So what else is going on in this parable? What else is going on? Who might Jesus' audience have been? If it's not necessarily the disciples, or it could be the disciples, but what would the message be then? Another question might be, well, who is Matthew? What kind of story does Matthew have? Who are day laborers? And what is a householder? And how much is a denarius? And why are these day laborers standing around idle at the 11th hour? Okay, another screenshot here. Keep this in mind again. What meanings or meaning might we get if we factor in this socioeconomic religious perspective that was really prominent at the time this story was told? If we look through the eyes of the lens of religion, what does kinship, what does economy, and what does politics have to do with this? Okay, thank you, Davey. So first question, who is Matthew? Well, what we know about Matthew was he was an elite, educated, religious Jewish person. So what was on Matthew's mind when this parable was recorded 40 to 50 years later? Well, one thing is the developing church, the followers of Jesus, as opposed to other Jewish people. And that also then would have included Gentiles, converts, as well as Jews. So one of the prominent questions at the time and controversies was focused around Gentiles. Do they have the same role as Jewish people do? Do they enter into the kingdom of heaven the same way? Do they have to follow all the Jewish religious laws, like food laws and circumcision laws and all that kind of stuff? Matthew was concerned about these things. Many believe that Matthew transforms this story or parable into one that has Jesus addressing a situation that might not have existed when Jesus was telling this story. So he was reading back into a story, something that may not have been there at the time. We do this all the time. So why can't Matthew do it? Well, we take biblical teachings and we apply them to issues like, or we force them on issues like abortion or medical technology or just technology in general. We superimpose our understandings of religion on church and school. We have certainly done it on sexuality recently. We are doing it again on patriotism and the Constitution and all those things. So one of the understandings here is that interpreters, like we all are, or like Matthew was, are eager to expand or apply what Jesus may or may not have said to a situation that is important in our own lives. The caution is obvious. We must be careful to recognize that we could be reading into a situation that which is not there. So then that comes back to one of the points I'm trying to make, is to say the details of the parable are really important to look at. So, for example, we looked at Matthew. Who are these day laborers? How many of you have ever done day labor? Stood in line waiting to go tear apart a machine or to stack things in different places and get $5 for the day or something like that, right? They were paid a day's work for a day's pay for a day's work. But it raises the question of why were they around? Why were they available? Well, it's because unemployment was predominant. Unemployment is a symptom, like we talked about last week a little bit. Unemployment is symptomatic of what's going on in your world. And in this world, there was much social unrest. So it impacts the economic situation of people, and there was a lot of unemployment. And it's also ironic when you get into the details that these day laborers were possibly working on land that they used to own, that they used to farm, which then, because it had been taken away from them. So it adds a really bitter twist to the supposed generosity of the householder. Oh, that's an interesting little detail. Well, who are householders or landowners? Well, they were wealthy rulers with absolute power and absolute authority over tenant farmers or day laborers. This one in the story uses day laborers because he's anxious about getting his crops in because the harvest was upon them and they needed to be harvested. They were worth a lot of money, these crops, all right? And the householder likely wouldn't normally have been seen in the fields. In verse 1 of this parable, he is in the field. So there's a twist in the story that we might not pick up. What's he doing out there in the fields? That's not a normal thing. Managers or stewards would be the ones that did this work. So in verse 8, the owner of the vineyard says to the steward, I want you to call the laborers in and pay them their wages. That makes sense. But then he accuses these laborers of idleness in verse 6. Why are you standing around? Idle all day. Goes back to the question, who is the audience here? Was it disciples? Well, maybe there's a great teaching there for disciples, but if the audience were unemployed laborers hearing a story about themselves, then this statement would be insulting and it would be accusatory. And note that they are at the 11th hour, workers are still available, suggesting a labor surplus was significant. So what do we need to know about the crop? Well, I'm not sure. It could have been a number of things, but it was worth a great deal of money if it is harvested on time. And so this landowner went out continuously to find laborers because there was pressure to harvest the crop. So how much is a denarius worth? Not much. One day's food, perhaps. I like to joke with my two sons who are both into rap and hip-hop. Another day, another 50 cent. Wasn't worth much more than that. So many of you are probably familiar with Brazilian educator Paulo Freire, who taught that it is difficult to get peasants to see what is happening to them. And landowners, powerful people who have no vested interest in teaching them either. So this story is a codification, I think, a picture, a good story that it discloses the system to them. It helps them see. So back to this again, telling a story like this would be in their mindset. Through religion, they understand family and kinship values that are disrupted. They understand an economy that is not working for them, it's working against them, and they understand the incredibly powerful lack of power that they have in this situation. Religion is the primary lens through which they saw the world. Now, according to Paulo Freire, to peasants, how the world is set up is somehow fate, or it's divinely planned. But if a religious view includes this kinship, economy, and politics, then this parable is about an exploitive system, not a divine system. So that raises questions like, well, could Jesus, I'm assuming Jesus told this story, could Jesus have been suggesting that to this group of people, whether it's the disciples or the laborers, that this system, this world is not set up to alienate them? The world as it's supposed to be is not set up to alienate anyone from their means of survival. That's kind of a good trouble kind of question, don't you think? It's not God's will that things are the way they are. People, wake up. Do they have the right then or the ability to question it? Was Jesus doing the John Lewis thing? Was John Lewis doing the Jesus thing and causing good trouble by telling a story? Well, revolutions are not usually started by poor people who are concerned mainly about bread and survival. So a codification, a good story, helps people reflect on their existence in the world. And this parable then begins to, as you peel the onion, so to speak, reveal how people in power live as if they are God, and how they are able to keep people poor and powerless. So it presents an ideology and a practice of a ruling class as opposed to an ideology and the world of poor people. So then it becomes a parable about social control. The kingdom of heaven is like? Okay. So back to this one again. If in that world it's all about religion, then this story is about God and justice in the world, or the lack thereof, and how to change it. Now some details begin to sound a little different. So we'll go to the next screenshot here. So I'm going to go back to look at a couple verses specifically. The owner says, "Is your eye evil because I am good? Or do you begrudge my generosity?" See, the thing about reading parables is we don't have any tone, right? I have the power, you do not, is the tone that you might hear. I can do whatever I want. Just take what's yours and come back tomorrow, but get the hell out of here. And what happens? The laborers fight over another 50 cents. They fight over crumbs, and they're needed crumbs, but crumbs nevertheless, because the denarius, I heard a teacher say one time, a denarius a day is about enough to starve to death over a 6 to 7 year period of working. Okay, the next screenshot. The complaint is this by the day laborers. Well, these last worked only 1 hour. And you have made them equal to us, who have borne the burden of the day and the scorching heat. And it was scorching heat. Good point. Good point. Think about the kinship box that's at the top of that. If you look through religious perspective, honor and shame are pivotal values for the kinship structure of the time. If you take honor away from people and shame them, and only give them a denarius a day, they will truly die. So the next one, verses 13 to 14. The householder says to one of them, "Friend, oh friend, I am doing you no wrong. Did you not agree with me for a denarius? Take what belongs to you and go. I choose to give to the last as I gave to the first." friend? You might hear a bit of a patronizing sarcasm here, as if he was saying, my good fellow, you agreed. Take it or leave it. The householder is in complete control here. And the householder must retain control so he can still get workers to get the crops in so that he can make mucho dinero. Now, that's all insulting enough, but here's the zinger that many today will not understand. What is wrong with this next statement? The householder says, am I not allowed to do what I choose with what belongs to me? Then, or do you begrudge my generosity, or is your eye evil because I am good? That's not just an insult. That's blasphemy. He says, and here's why. He says he now owns the land, not God. He completely violates the religion-based world of the time by flipping it upside down. And these are my words now. I, who violate every law of God, ask you if you are evil because I am good. That's blasphemy. And blasphemy tears at the entire fabric of their society. I don't think we really understand that. Because it violates religion, it violates kinship, it violates economy and politics all at once. And if the landowner is Gentile to boot, which is a possibility, a Roman, for example, then that person is rubbing their nose in it. Rubbing their nose in it one way or the other. But if that person is not Jewish, then you have that much more of a violation of their way of living and believing. And if you think about it, many people died because they challenged this Roman belief that Caesar was God. So one might now imagine this story, this parable of control imposed upon a colonized people being told by a revolutionary hanging out with day laborers in the marketplace. That's the audience that really ignites my imagination. And then one might imagine the frustration building in people whose power and control over their lives is constantly stripped away. Now what do we got? Well, the last screenshot is the same as one of the first ones that you saw. A parable is a codification or a picture of the world and how it works at a given time. So what does this ancient story of the laborers in the vineyard say about the world at that time? And how might it help us understand the current crisis in Palestine, Israel, and also our own world and our relationships with indigenous peoples? Can it make us aware of what is sacred or holy, regardless of or inclusive of how we all define God? So last week I ended with a question that I struggle with, is how is death redemptive? And again, I'm not insinuating that it's not. I'm saying, how is it, the death of anyone, redemptive in their time and in our time? That's possibly a hopeful question. So, thank you for allowing me to go on a rant. So we have another hymn.